Remake of Dragon Ball Super is out, and with an insane animation, now in 2026, titled Dragon Ball Super Beerus, an insane animation. All of this to precede the Moro saga, and with that, a lot of information. Could it be that now, with this remake, Dragon Ball Daima will fit into Dragon Ball Super, and there is nothing copy and paste? It will be something totally different. Just by the video, it is something surreal. Are you ready for this? So already run and subscribe to the channel, leave your like, and activate the bell. It is a remasterization, not a complete remake, and yes, a more ambitious version of Fishman Island remastered. This theme calls for a conceptual, analytical, and exciting script, because here we are not talking only about a remake, but about a complete restructuring of the Dragon Ball timeline, something that has never been done in such a conscious way within the franchise. Imagine this with me. 2026, Dragon Ball Super returns, but not in the way we imagined for years. It is not simply continuation. It is not episode 132. It is a conceptual remake, a repositioning, a Dragon Ball Super redone with maturity, planning, and, above all, with insane animation. The name already says everything. Dragon Ball Super Beerus. Just this title already changes the weight of the conversation, because it makes clear who is the axis of the story and what is the true starting point of this new phase. This would not be a common remake. It is not redoing scenes frame by frame, not reusing dialogues. It is reinterpreting the initial phase of Dragon Ball Super with the knowledge that the franchise today has about itself. It is looking back knowing exactly where it wants to go, and that changes everything. When Dragon Ball Super began in 2015, it was born in a completely different context: rushed production, tight schedule, direct adaptation of movies, little space for long-term planning. Today, in 2026, the scenario is another. Toei knows what worked, what didn't, who the central characters are, what tone the audience expects, and, most importantly, what the next big arc is, the Moro saga. A remake before it would not be redundancy, it would be preparation. Dragon Ball Super Beerus would work as a solid foundation. Beerus would stop being just the villain of the movie, or the lazy god of destruction, and would start being treated as what he always should have been, the zero mark of the divine era. The being that changes the logic of the universe, the character that transforms Dragon Ball from a story about mortal limits into a story about cosmic balance. With high-level animation, cinematic, consistent from beginning to end, this version would show the real impact of Beerus' arrival in Universe 7, the fear, the tension, the fragility of Goku and Vegeta faced to something they do not understand. There would be no rush, there would be no out-of-place humor breaking the mood at the wrong moments. Everything would be built to make it clear, from here on, Dragon Ball is no longer the same. And it is exactly here that Dragon Ball Daima begins to fit in naturally. Daima by itself has already made it clear that it is not an isolated or random project. It messes with fundamental concepts, essence, origin, identity, regression not as weakness, but as a reunion with something primordial. Instead of contradicting Dragon Ball Super, Daima can function as a conceptual interlude, something that happens in this new narrative space created after Beerus' arrival. With Dragon Ball Super Beerus establishing the weight of the gods, and Daima exploring the more symbolic side, almost mythical of the characters, the fit stops being forced. Daima would not need to be treated as outside the timeline, or parallel story. It would become an experience that happens within a universe that is already unstable, already transformed by divine presence. The big difference here is that there is no copy and paste. Nothing would be repeated mechanically. The fight against Beerus would not be the same. Super Saiyan God would not be treated as a disposable form. It would have real importance, its own aesthetic, spiritual meaning. Goku's relationship with the divine would be more contemplative, less impulsive. Vegeta would have a denser emotional arc from the beginning, preparing the ground for everything he would later live, especially in the Moro saga. This remake would allow something that the original Dragon Ball Super failed to do: plant narrative seeds in advance. The Galactic Patrol could be mentioned in a subtle way. The idea of cosmic criminals, interplanetary prisons, threats that are not just brute force could arise in dialogues, in reports, in comments of Whis, not as an explicit promise, but as world building. Daima, in this context, would stop looking like an aesthetic rupture and would become a thematic extension. While Super Beerus talks about scale, Daima talks about essence. While one expands the universe upward, the other looks inward. And this is powerful because it emotionally prepares the audience for something like Moro, which mixes both extremes, universal scale and vital essence. When the Moro saga finally arrived, it would not arrive in a vacuum. It would arrive in a universe that already understands what gods are, what vital energy is, what cosmic imbalance is. Beerus would have shown the top of the chain. Daima would have questioned what exists at the base. Moro would emerge as the error in the system, the parasite that exploits all of this. Visually, this path also makes perfect sense. A remake with insane animation redefines the quality standard. It clearly says, "This is the new Dragon Ball." Daima, with its own visual identity, would not seem strange but complementary. And when Moro were adapted, the audience would already be used to a bolder, more cinematic, more authorial language. Another crucial point is the emotional impact. A well-made remake creates connection with a new generation and reconnects those who were already tired. It does not erase the past, but offers a new entry point. Daima, in this scenario, does not confuse, it deepens. And the Moro saga benefits from this, because it is a saga that demands emotional involvement, not just hype. In the end, Dragon Ball Super Beerus would not be just a remake. It would be a strategic repositioning of the franchise, a way to align chronology, aesthetics, narrative, and creative ambition. Daima would stop being seen as something separate and would become an important piece of this bigger puzzle. And Moro would emerge not as just another villain, but as the inevitable consequence of everything that was presented before. If this is confirmed, Dragon Ball enters 2026 not only more beautiful, but more coherent, more daring, and more prepared for the future. It is not about repeating Dragon Ball. It is about retelling the foundation to support what comes next. And if just by the video it already seems something surreal, imagine when all of this is truly connected. A cool question for this remake would be whether it is possible that there are things from Beerus's past, just like Goku in the Super Broly movie. Yes, it can, and more than that, it makes complete sense that there is. If Dragon Ball really follows this more cinematic and planned path that we are discussing, exploring Beerus's past in the same way that the Broly movie explored Goku's past would not just be an interesting extra, it would be a strategic narrative decision. In the Broly movie, the prologue with Bardock does not exist just to please old fans. It serves to recontextualize the present. It shows that what we are seeing now is a direct consequence of choices made decades earlier. Applying this logic to Beerus would elevate Dragon Ball to another level, because Beerus is not just a strong character, he is a pillar of the cosmic system. Showing fragments of Beerus's past would allow answering questions that have always remained in the air. How did he become a god of destruction? Was he always like this, or was he shaped by the position? What was his relation with other gods, with mortals, with Whis himself before fully assuming his role? These answers do not need to be delivered in an expository way. They can come in short, silent, almost mythological scenes, exactly like the Broly prologue did with Bardock. Narratively, this would have a direct impact on the audience's perception of Beerus. Beerus would stop being seen only as the initial obstacle of Dragon Ball Super and would start being understood as someone who carries centuries of difficult decisions, mistakes, regrets, and adaptations. This does not make him good, but it makes him more complex, and complexity is exactly what Dragon Ball has been seeking in its most recent sagas. These flashbacks would also serve to align the tone of the remake. Just as Goku's past in the Broly movie established a more serious atmosphere right from the beginning, Beerus's past could establish that this new phase does not treat gods as a joke. We could see Beerus still immature, perhaps excessively destructive, perhaps insecure, being guided or restrained by Whis. This creates contrast with the current Beerus, tired, selective, apparently lazy, but extremely aware of the weight of what he does. Another important point is how this connects with the future. A Beerus with a past explored speaks directly to the Moro saga. Moro is a being that escapes the system, that takes advantage of flaws in cosmic balance. Showing old decisions of Beerus, perhaps destructions made without full discernment, helps reinforce the idea that the current universe is the result of accumulated choices. Moro does not emerge out of nowhere. He arrives in a universe that has already been shaped, broken, and patched together several times. And the parallel with Goku is very strong. Goku has a past that he doesn't remember, but it influences everything. Beerus has a past that he remembers perfectly, but prefers to ignore. This opposition is narratively rich. While Goku moves forward driven by instinct, Beerus observes everything with the experience of someone who has already seen civilizations be born and die. Putting these 2 points into dialogue only strengthens the story. Visually, these scenes would also be a spectacle on their own. A young Beerus, different styles of destruction, universes with ancient aesthetics, extinct races, all of this contributes to the feeling of grandeur and antiquity of Dragon Ball's cosmos. It is not empty fan service, it is myth building. So yes, there is a real and coherent possibility of seeing elements of Beerus's past, and if this happens, it will not be to copy what was done with Goku in the Broly movie, but to apply the same principle, using the past to give weight to the present and prepare the ground for the future. If Dragon Ball really wants to reinvent itself without losing its identity, this is exactly the kind of choice that makes sense. This is a very strong possibility, and from a narrative and strategic point of view, it makes complete sense that a remake of Dragon Ball Super with an initial focus on Beerus brings in it elements from the past of the God of Destruction, in a similar way to what was done with Goku in the Broly movie.
And it is precisely here that this project would stop being anything close to copy and paste and become an ambitious reconstruction of the Dragon Ball universe for the era of 2026.
In this hypothetical script, the so-called Dragon Ball Super Beerus would not begin merely by revisiting the awakening of the God of Destruction, but by completely repositioning his figure within the mythology of the series. Beerus's past has always been treated as a convenient mystery, mentioned only in fragments, jokes, or insinuations by Whis. A remake would allow showing Beerus before his consolidation as a god of destruction, still unstable, perhaps less indifferent, dealing with choices that shaped his apathetic personality and his ambiguous relationship with duty. Just as the Broly movie used Goku's past to reinforce themes of legacy, survival, and destiny, Beerus's past could serve to introduce concepts that will only gain full weight in the Moro saga and beyond, such as the balance between creation and destruction, divine responsibility, and the consequences of cosmic failures. Within this logic, dividing the arcs of the remake by names such as Beerus, Xeno, and so on is not only plausible but extremely intelligent. Instead of adapting closed sagas as in the old model, the remake could function as large thematic acts. The Beerus arc would establish the insane visual tone, the new animation standard, and the repositioning of divine power. It would be less about Goku facing Beerus, and more about the universe understanding what it means to exist under the shadow of a god of destruction. Goku, in this context, would function almost as a catalyst, someone who awakens reactions in Beerus, but not the absolute center of the narrative. Next, a Xeno arc would allow expanding the concept of supreme authority, something that the original anime treated in a superficial and even caricatured way. The remake could show how Xeno reached this position, why multiple universes were erased in the past, and how this connects directly to the existence of entities like Moro, who represent systemic failures of the multiverse itself. This would create a direct line between the seemingly disconnected events of Dragon Ball Super and give real weight to the idea that the Tournament of Power was not a whim, but a desperate solution for a system on the verge of collapse. It is at this point that Dragon Ball Daima could fit organically. Instead of being seen as a parallel project or something strange to the main line, Daima could function as an indirect consequence of these greater forces. Changes in the balance of the universe, tampering with the flow of time, or interventions by higher entities could justify transformations, regressions, or distortions without breaking Super's logic. The remake would have precisely the function of preparing the ground, recontextualizing Daima as part of a larger plan, not as a stylistic deviation. All of this would serve as a long cinematic introduction to the Moro saga. When Moro finally emerged, he would not just be another powerful villain, but the materialization of an ancient error, something that perhaps goes back to Beerus's own past, or even to decisions made by Xeno in previous eras. Vegeta, who in the Moro saga gains enormous conceptual protagonism, would already be emotionally and philosophically prepared for this confrontation, especially if the remake had worked better on his relationship with guilt, redemption, and cosmic responsibility from the beginning. Visually, this project would have total freedom to be something surreal, as you mentioned, not just more fluid or detailed, but with cinematic language, bold framing, symbolic use of colors, and soundtracks that reinforce the almost mythological character of the story. This would help definitively separate this remake from the feeling of repetition, making it clear that this is a new reading of Dragon Ball Super, made for an audience that grew up with the franchise and expects something denser without losing the essence. In summary, yes, it is totally coherent to imagine that this remake explores Beerus's past the way Broly did with Goku, that it divides its arcs by entities and concepts instead of just villains, that it absorbs Dragon Ball Daima as part of the functional canon, and that it serves as a careful and mature preparation for the Moro saga. If executed this way, it would not just be a remake, but a narrative reconstruction of Dragon Ball for the next decade.